Amandla! Thank you, comrades. Pambili nomzabalazo wabasebenzi. Pambili! Pambili! Thank you. Comrades, I think I want to start with how Amandla started with me. Having been on the collective for a while, sometime in April 2015, I got a phone call from Brian. And he said, we've got a problem, which wasn't the first phone call that started like that. And he said, we're committed to producing 6 issues of this magazine per year. It's now April, and we've just about managed to produce 1. So please, will you come on board and help us produce the next 5? And I thought this was just for a year. Now, 10 years and 60 issues later, I'm still here, and it's been one of the pleasures, actually, of my life to do it. So I want to take you through a couple of meaningful moments for me in that process, although there have been so many. I remember, for example, Amandla number 43, December 2015. That was the issue that was devoted to listening to the voices of the students from Fees Must Fall and Roads Must Fall. And it was very interesting in that period that one of the strong messages that came out was a serious distrust in that movement for people from political parties. Yeah. Political parties were, if you want to come in here, you leave your t-shirt outside. Yeah. Okay, and it's an interesting challenge for us as a political organization. Then I think of Amandla 57, April 2018. The world was swooning over Cyril Ramaphosa as he came to office. He was singing Tumamina, if you remember. And the headline in Amandla was, "The honeymoon will not last." We are vindicated, comrades. History has absolved us. Amandla 58, just one of a long series of typical examples where we reinforce the fundamental message that permeates really all of the last 60 issues. There will be no significant change to the social misery of the mass of the population of this country without profound change in the economic strategy, and we have been putting forward that message consistently throughout. We had an issue in Amandla 67, 68 at the end of 2018 where we looked at a moment, a brief period of upsurge of struggle. We had uprisings in Sudan. It's hard to remember that now in the situation now. In Hong Kong, in Chile. So we saw these little glimmers. Those are the things that keep us going and keep us alive. Then, shortly after that, the virus hit. Amandla 69 looked at the new environment and examined that from a class perspective and from a gender perspective. By the end of 2021, we were lamenting the failures of COP26. Now we're lamenting the failures of COP30. I think by the issue of 200, we will still be lamenting COP if it's even remembered. Amandla 81 dealt with and examined an issue which was really one of the most important that has confronted the left over the last period, the question of Ukraine. How do we orient towards Ukraine? We found writers from around the world. We took, I think, a position in relation to Ukraine, but it's an issue which the left still needs to debate because it has caused fractures which have not yet been mended by any means. And then probably my favorite of all, to speak very personally, in Amandla 88, the reluctant president was born. Now, some of you may not have looked, because you don't get as far as the inside back cover. But since Amandla 88, the reluctant president has been there on the inside back cover, talking away to his wife about the terrible things that have happened to him in the world, and how all he really wants to do is to go and look after his cows on his farm. So you can read all the issues of since 1988, issue 88. I think The biggest change that has taken place over that 10 years, at any rate, has been the move towards becoming more digital. We've always been a little bit digital. We're trying to move towards becoming more digital. So 2 years ago, our website was a mess. It wasn't really usable. Now we have a live website. We upload 3 new articles every week.
Wow.
Thank you. Almost all of that is original material. We do sometimes reproduce stuff from elsewhere. So we also have done this year, I think, 3 podcasts. So we're moving more into a kind of multimedia kind of age. The future, I think, that we see is that we have to engage more effectively than we have done up till now with social media to reach new audiences, because we have a tendency to be speaking to the same people that we've spoken to for a while. We need to speak to a younger audience, we need to speak to a student audience, we need to speak to a youth audience, and we need to find our way there through an effective social media campaign, and that is the challenge that we need to face. So, comrades, I now want to say that we've been talking since yesterday evening, absolutely rightly, about handing over the baton. This is not the moment when I resign as the editor, I can tell you yet. But I will absolutely signal my desire that somebody else emerges, who we can begin to bring through as the next editor, and a young editor of Amandla. And in the meantime, I'm going to hand over the lead in the steering of this discussion to one of that younger generation and a member of the Amandla collective, Comrade Andile. Thank you, Comrade.
Thank you, Comrade Roger. So, as was mentioned before, comrades, we're here to discuss a very urgent issue that I think is going to define the next few decades for all of us here, whether you're socialist or not, and that is the issue of meeting the challenge of the far right, and what obstacles, what problems that poses for us on the left. A few days ago, as an example, the United States released their national security strategy, in which they said Europe faces civilizational erasure due to the growing population of so-called non-white Europeans. They are currently persecuting South Africa, claiming that we're facilitating a white genocide. Hindu nationalism continues to persecute religious minorities in India. Although we saw a pink wave in Latin America, it seems to be quite precarious as well. Around the world, migrants are facing persecution. Black and brown people are facing persecution. The reproductive rights of women seem to be under challenge. And so I think this is an opportunity with the speakers we have here today to unpack this issue. So we are joined by a few panelists. From my right, we have Daniel Chavez, we have Zarah Sultana, we have Vivi Reis, and we have Joseph Choonara. Give them a hand, please. So this is a discussion, and there will be, questions that I gear towards, but we're also going to go with the flow of the conversation and obviously make enough time for you comrades to give your comments, inputs, and insights and questions as well. And so to kick off the discussion, perhaps I'd like to start with Joseph. On the question of what distinguishes this right, this far right, from what we've seen historically? What is the nature of this new right? Is it fascist? Is it neo-fascist? How does it differ from Mussolini in Italy or from Hitler in Germany in the 40s?
Yeah, I think when you look at the far right today, what you see is a range of different kinds of organisations. There is, if you like, a spectrum of far-right racist organisations developing. Some of these do go back to the strategy of classical fascism. And what I mean when I talk about classical fascism of the 1920s and 1930s, I mean street movements, movements outside of the state, mass movements, which would be forged out of disparate elements, often middle-class elements squeezed by capitalism, often disenfranchised groups of workers, unemployed people, a few people from a more ruling class background and so on. What the fascists would do would take these elements and try to forge them into a force that could control the streets. And they'd do that through virulent forms of racism, genocidal racism, nationalism, sexism, etc., etc. And they'd give a direction to these kind of movements. And at moments of crisis, what the fascists did in the 20s and 30s was they offered these forces as a tool for capital to break the working class movement, to atomise workers, to impose a dictatorship. So when the ruling class could no longer rely on the police and army to do this, the fascists could offer themselves. So this is what I think of as classical fascist movements. Now, there are still movements like that around. In Britain, we have a fascist, Tommy Robinson, who mobilised 100,000 people on the streets a few months ago. He has that kind of vision in his head. There's similar people, Golden Dawn in Greece had a similar kind of strategy. Some of the armed groups in America. On the other side of the scale, you have right-wing racist politicians who don't have this strategy, but they enable fascism. I think about someone like Donald Trump, or in Britain, Nigel Farage. I don't think they have a fascist strategy, but they're using the rhetoric, the same rhetoric as fascism, to try to break into mainstream politics and capture a place in mainstream politics. The differences are important. We're not seeing classical fascism in the sense that the ruling class today are not terrified by the working class rising up. Sadly, I wish they were. But that's not the situation we're in. But they still need to drive for attacks on workers. And at some point, sections of the ruling class may start to look to these fascist groups to do that. But I think all these different groups, what they do is they shift the political spectrum to the right. And even the figures like Trump and Farage, who are not open fascists, they enable the fascist forces to develop. You saw that in the attack on the Capitol by the Proud Boys and other neo-Nazi militia groups that was enabled by Trump. So all these kind of movements are a real danger and a threat to us, but they operate in slightly different ways tactically, which we have to understand.
Okay. Yeah. We also have our translator here as well, Juliana.
Good evening.
Good evening, comrade.
Primeiramente, destacar que a gente vive um período de uma crise crônica do capitalismo e ela tem muitas dimensões, que são sociais, econômicas, ambientais e políticas, né?
So first we would like to highlight that we live in a period of interconnected crisis, social crisis, environmental crisis, a political crisis.
E assim, o fascismo ele nunca deixou de existir, mas agora nós podemos caracterizar como um neofascismo porque o fascismo ele ganhou peso na burguesia, principalmente no período após a crise econômica de 2008, porque a burguesia ela precisa desse autoritarismo para aplicar a sua política contra-revolucionária e também enfrentar essa desordem mundial que a gente vive.
Fascism never ceased to exist. The difference now is that fascism, and we call it neo-fascism, is that it has gained again the bourgeoisie since the crisis, the 2008 crisis. And they need fascism to implement their counter-revolutionary politics.
E aí nós temos vários exemplos ao longo do mundo, né? No Brasil, por exemplo, através do bolsonarismo, o Trump nos Estados Unidos, o Milei na Argentina, e eles carregam muito forte um discurso antissistema, um discurso de radicalidade que nós precisamos analisar bem sobre como isso tem relação com o que as pessoas esperam da política.
And we see this happening in many places. We see it happening in Brazil with Bolsonaro. We see it happening in the US with Trump, in Argentina with Milei. And they come now with an anti-systemic discourse. They are against establishment. And we need to analyze very well these discourse because they bring radicality.
E esse neofascismo, ele nasce dentro desse regime democrático burguês. E que agora, além de milícias armadas que agem com violência, como era no fascismo, agora também existem as milícias digitais, que disputam a consciência.
And this neo-fascism, it grows right from within the bourgeois law, from within our bourgeois democratic systems, and beyond the armed groups that used to terrorize the left and the politics in the past. They also now have digital groups, virtual militias that are now disputing ideology, our minds.
E nesse contexto que a gente vive de fome, de genocídio em Gaza, catástrofes climáticas, nós precisamos também pensar como organizar a esquerda para dar resposta a essa realidade tão dura e seguir combatendo a extrema-direita e o neofascismo ao longo do mundo.
And in this context of growing hunger, of genocide, of climate catastrophes, we need to keep on thinking, how can we organize the left so we can tackle this reality that is very difficult, so we can keep on the struggle.
This towards Daniel, I'd like to know then from your perspective, there was a mentioning of the crises that have resulted in this resurgence of fascism. So I would perhaps a comment from you on why the right is advancing. What are the social and economic conditions which have made this resurgence possible?
Yeah. Yes, before answering the question, I want to congratulate Amandla for the anniversary. I'm a sort of regular contributor to Amandla, so I want to give a big thank you for the comrades and also a big apology, because usually I submit my articles 1 or 2 days after the deadline, so I'm sorry for making you suffer. Yeah, in relation to the question, I think before answering that question, we should, or we could have a nice conversation about what is the far right, in the sense of where the traditional right ends and where the far right begins. Today during dinner we were having a conversation with Joseph, and I was telling him my experience. I'm a Latin American researcher and political and social activist who happens to live in the Netherlands. And when we think the transformation of the traditional right-wing parties in many places in Latin America and in Western Europe, we see that there has been a radicalization of those traditional right-wing parties. That means that the line between the right and the far right is quite thin, and it's becoming thinner and thinner all the time. So if we try to explain why is the right advances and what are the social and economic conditions that make it possible, I think something that we need to consider is that the so-called post-war consensus, at least in Europe and in many parts of Latin America, I will not say anything about Africa, and I apologize for that. I spent a lot of time in this country, but I think to talk about what the right, what the left, what the far right means in this national context is quite problematic, especially for those of us who are not from here. But talking about the right in Latin America and Europe, I think the first thing we need to consider is the erosion of the post-war consensus. Until some decades ago, there was a sort of unwritten agreement between the conservative parties and the social democratic parties, in which they agreed what were more or less the limits of the market and what sort of public policy could be implemented on those countries. But quite rapidly, the social democrats lost their both will and capacity to transform society, and the conservative parties lost their justification for moderation. And if that was not enough, when the real economic and financial crisis came, the Social Democrats were not up to the expectation of the working class and the marginalized sector of society. So that created a lot of disenchantment, and that meant that not only the Social Democrats lost support, but progressives and the left in general lost support. I think it's not by chance that many people who vote today for the far right in countries such as France or Italy, for instance, used to vote some decades ago, not so long ago, for the Communist Party, for instance. And we see that sort of transition in the voting preference also in many places in Latin America. I come from Uruguay, where the left is in government and where the left traditionally has been quite powerful, but we never thought that we could have a right-wing party, but we did. And in the election 5 years ago, there was, out of the blue, the creation of a new party that is called Cabildo Abierto, something like Open Assembly, in which a former commander of the army got 12% of the vote.
Sure.
So that's something to be very worried about. And something similar happened in Costa Rica, which is another country comparable to Uruguay, in which the current government, even though the media try to present it as a right-wing government, is very much a far-right government.
I think in the UK and across Europe we see the rise of the far right, and the reason why that is happening in our context is because capitalism is in crisis, and we see that across the world. And people have seen their material conditions worsen. There's stagnant wages, there's precarious work. We have a low-wage economy that is full of zero-hour contracts. We have soaring rents, where young people disproportionately pay over half of their income to landlords. We have housing shortages, collapsing public services, and governments that continuously insist that there are no alternatives to this level of inequality. And in the UK, the richest 50 families have more wealth than half of the population. The levels of inequality, we're the second most unequal country in the OECD. America's first. So people materially recognise that their lives are worse, and trust in establishment politics has therefore hollowed out. And we see how the left, especially through the Labour Party, has been marginalised and attacked. And we see the far right, in particular Nigel Farage, fill that vacuum, saying that the reason why people's lives are worse are because of migrants. So you have the same story here. And they pose as anti-establishment, even though Nigel Farage in the UK's context is a billionaire stockbroker whose party is funded by billionaires and aristocrats. And so it couldn't get more establishment than Reform and then Nigel Farage. And they thrive on this hopelessness, and we feel it when you knock on doors in Coventry and the rest of the UK. You feel the despair that has set in. And rather than obviously giving people solutions to these crises, the far right would rather tell them that refugees are your enemy. And in particular, Joseph mentioned the street movements that we're seeing. We had the largest fascist mobilisation in recent British history in London a couple of months ago. Over 100,000 people mobilised by Tommy Robinson, and who's backing him? It's not nurses, it's not teachers, it's not taxi drivers, it's the insecure Nepo baby Elon Musk. And I think South Africa has to recognise their role in Elon Musk. Don't claim him, I wouldn't either. But he is literally funding the likes of Tommy Robinson. Last summer in the UK, we saw racist pogroms in our towns and cities where mosques were attacked, and women and children because of their colour of their skin. So when we think about fascism and it being this, far distant nightmare. It's here and now in the present. And when I speak to communities in the UK, I just want to end with this. It's a poem by a Jewish poet called Michael Rosen, who says, I sometimes fear that people fear that fascism arrives in fancy dress, worn by grotesques and monsters. Fascism arrives as your friend. It will restore your honour, make you feel proud, protect your house, give you a job, clean up the neighbourhood, and remind you of how great you once were. We know that fascism doesn't come into our communities wearing swastikas or marching in jackboots. It arrives with this common language, this common sense language of taking back control, protecting our women and girls. That's what we hear in the UK, and legitimate concerns. And when it's social democratic parties and those moderate politicians who use that language, they don't neutralise the threat of the far right, they legitimise them. They don't weaken the far right, they strengthen them. And people will always vote for the original rather than the copy. And that's what we're seeing in the UK. You know, the Reform Party and Nigel Farage are set to form a government. But 1 in 3 of their voters blame the super rich for the problems in our country rather than migrants. And that tells us, as the left, that there is work that can be done and we can win over people, but we have to do the hard work to get there.
I just want to make one sort of qualification, because I agree with most of what people are saying, and certainly I agree with Daniel's point that the line between traditional conservative parties and far-right parties is breaking down to a large extent. The Conservative Party in Britain, the Republican Party in America are examples of that. But I do think we have to be very clear. In Europe, in North America, these aren't fascist regimes. And it's a really important distinction to make, because there are people who want to create fascist regimes. We have to understand what that means. When you talk about a fascist regime, you're not talking about a society in which you can have elections of any kind. You're not talking about a society in which you can form trade unions. You know, the Nazis banned the Boy Scouts. They banned every form of social organisation. They completely atomised resistance. They built death camps and so on and so forth. Because sometimes people on the left say, oh, the fascists have already taken control. If that's true, what's the point of trying to resist? So we have to be clear that the regimes that are in power at the moment are frightening. They increase the danger of fascism. But we still have a job of work to do to resist the rise of fascism, to confront fascism, and make sure that we don't see the establishment of actual fascist regimes. And we have to do that before the crisis deepens. Because when the crisis gets really deep, that the ruling class gamble in fascist street movements. So we have to make that very important qualification. We're in a dangerous situation. We're not yet seeing fascism cemented in power.
Yes, I fully agree with Joseph. I grew up under a military dictatorship, so for me, nobody has to explain me what is fascism, because I suffered it. So I fully agree with you about the need to be very aware that we need to prepare to what could come next, that could be much worse than whatever we think today of the so-called far right in Europe. But looking at the composition of the far right today, and looking mainly again to Latin America and Europe, I think we see a lot of heterogeneity, a lot of internal diversity. If we look at Javier Milei in Argentina, for instance, the leader of an ultra-libertarian government, if we look at Vox in Spain, the ultranationalist Catholic nostalgic of Franco, or if we look at the far right in the country where I live, the Netherlands, they are very, very different creatures. They are totally different animals. But this diversity doesn't mean a weakness for the far right, because they tend to converge quite rapidly. And there are some sort of organization, and I think funding is important. Zarah mentioned Elon Musk providing funding for some far-right figures in the UK. There are some other big funders there that are trying to create a so-called neo-fascist or far-right international. In the past, we have an alliance between Mussolini, Hitler, Franco, and some other not so well-known characters in Eastern Europe. Today, the far right is not so much united. Even in the European Parliament, they cannot agree to join the same parliamentary group. But in Latin America, for instance, we see that there are some very powerful agents who are trying to promote that convergence of different far-right parties despite their very clear differences. And I will mention three forces. One is the CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference. Originally, this was a sort of private club where far-right people from the Republican Party and big rich people would get together once every year or so to have a nice discussion. Now it's a real institution, and they are expanding. And they are inviting people like Milei, people like Abascal from Spain, to participate actively in their meeting. And they are organizing meeting in Brazil with Bolsonaro and some other very dark figure. Another big funder is the Heritage Foundation, also based in the US, who is providing a lot of money for these groups, organizing conferences or meetings like the one we are having here, but probably in a much better hotel with a lot of other resources.
What do you mean?
Have here. And then the other one, I don't know if they are active in Africa. I haven't done any research, but I know they are very active in Latin America and Europe, which is the Atlas Foundation. Last night I was, the Atlas Network, sorry. Yesterday I was reading a report that showed that the Atlas Network is active in every country of Latin America, including Cuba, if we consider the exiles in Miami, and they are composed of 78 far-right organizations from across the Americas. So that's the problem that I see, that despite their diversity, we increasingly see a convergence, and I really see the risk of a new sort of neo-fascist international or whatever we can call it.
Thank you, Daniel. I just want to shake things up a bit and have, before we continue the discussion, we've been going over the nature of the far right, the reasons why it's resurged. And so I would like to have a round of questions and inputs. We'll take three from the floor that can be directed towards any of the comrades on the panel. So if there are any comrades right now who would want to raise a question, raise an input, this is your first opportunity, and we'll do another round as well after the second stage of the discussion. So we have Comrade Bagi here, we've got Mubarak, we've got...
A lot of comrades behind me. Just in the context of South Africa, whilst all of us must be worried about the rise of the far-right xenophobic groups who are scapegoating the crisis that we all know is deepening of unemployment, poverty, inequality, homelessness, and everything that we can talk about. And that we, the left, are increasingly allowing those ultra-right wing, and we ceding the streets to them, and as a result, they may appear to be very big, more mobilized, more organized than us. But there is a hope that they're still very, very small. The xenophobic message, whilst it may be repeated over and over in the social media, but when you judge the groups like March and March, as well as the Operation Dula, by how many people they are able to bring to the streets, it's quite a very small movement. Also, if you look at the scapegoaters of the crisis, parties, such as the Action SA, the PA, and all of that, they are not doing very well in the elections. They are 2-3% parties. The biggest danger, I think, to me in South Africa is the ANC in desperation to be relevant again, moving towards that direction of shifting the blame not to themselves but to the migrants and scapegoating the foreigners and all of that. To me, that's the biggest danger because the ANC is big. And if it was to turn all together to the right, then that will present a big danger because you don't know the 2/3 of the population who are no longer participating in the vote as to whether they will not be shifting with them towards an ultra-right position. And if they can unite with the PA, ACDP, Operation Tutula, if you look at the marches in Johannesburg recently around the issue of the right of informal workers, they were in one block. Operation Tutula March and the ANC were in one block against the Abahlali Basemjondolo and Seri. To me, that's a real danger in South Africa.
Thank you so much. I actually wanted to say something very similar to what he said. What we're seeing right now is definitely a climate of certain very radical leaders on the right blaming foreigners for all the issues that are occurring in their country and using them as sort of something to take attention away from where all the money is actually going. You know, maybe they're funding, like she once said in her speech, maybe they're funding warfare instead of welfare within the country. So I just wanted to ask what the situation would become if, as we are seeing across the world, as these far-right leaders who have a lot of platform are saying that foreigners are the reason for all of their woes, it's spreading far and wide to countries like Canada and to countries like South Africa as well. Within my hometown in the Free State, just this year alone, about 5 foreigners have been murdered in cold blood by locals within the town. So I just wanted to ask what your opinion was on that. And the next thing that I wanted to say really was, I feel like we're in a very, very concerning place within South Africa, whereby we're in a situation where we can either align with the global West or align with the global South. So I just wanted to see what your opinion was on that as well. Oftentimes they say, when the US comes, you're going to get a speech. When China comes, they're going to build you a hospital. So I just wanted to ask what you guys think about that.
Thank you. I think your insights is really important in thinking about how genocide, whether in Palestine, in Sudan, etc., is being able to continue. But I want to go, I'm sorry I'm doing the South Africa thing, because I think the left often makes a mistake. So I've seen in Amandla Collective that some comrades on the left have classified the EFF, for example, as a fascist organization, which I think is incorrect. I think there have been we focus a lot on MKP, and it's not a fraud, and I think it's really important that we challenge Operation Dudula and xenophobia, but we are not looking at what is in front of us, which is Solidarity and AfriForum, right in our face. AfriForum has 600,000 registered members. They have just managed to, with their 600,000 members, sorry for those who don't know who AfriForum and Solidarity is, they are the right-wing par excellence in this country, the former National Party, AVB, that never dismantled. So 600,000 members are able to donate 100 Rand. They have 6 billion Rand at their disposal, and then they have Solidarity, which has 200,000 members. and we are worried only about MKP or EFF or the PA. And I think we are really not looking at the material power of white nationalists who continue to dominate and go to the US, go to Belgium and cry white genocide while the real genocide is happening in Palestine and Sudan and DRC. So I really think as people on the left in this country, we really need to focus more sharply on our analysis of what AfriForum and Solidarity is doing and how they are organizing power with arms, a whole lot of things, work for white people only, etc. And so I think we really need to think about that.
I think we can go for responses.
Primeiramente, deixar bem evidente a necessidade da esquerda seguir ocupando as ruas, se mobilizando e fazendo a política cara a cara, a política junto ao povo.
So first, I just want to emphasize the need for the left to keep on occupying the streets, to keep on mobilizing, to keep on doing politics face to face.
E eu posso trazer aqui um exemplo do Brasil que tem muita relação com várias das falas feitas aqui, porque nós hoje estamos num governo de Lula, que é um governo progressista, mas segue sendo um governo que faz conciliação com a burguesia e que muitas vezes tenta frear as lutas e não deixar que as pessoas sigam ocupando as ruas.
And I want to bring here an example from Brazil that has a lot of relationship with what has been said just now. I want to talk about the government of Lula, which is a progressive government, but it's a government that keep on doing conciliatory government. It's doing conciliation with the right, with the center, and more importantly, trying to stop people from going to the streets.
E é importante dizer que esse rebaixamento programático de Lula em seus dois governos e no governo da Dilma, que sofreu um golpe parlamentar, foi também deu suporte para a ascensão da direita no Brasil, porque foram governos que não atenderam de fato às expectativas do povo trabalhador.
And this lowering of ambition, this undermining of the left platform of the governments of Lula, the two governments of Lula, and then the government of Dilma, who actually suffered a coup, was outthrown in a parliamentary coup. This is due to the fact that they didn't manage to actually respond to the needs of the people. They couldn't address people's real needs.
Por exemplo, nós pautamos com muita força, inclusive fazendo mobilizações em solidariedade ao povo palestino. O Lula já fez pronunciamento a respeito da questão do genocídio na Palestina, mas ele ainda não rompeu as relações econômicas com o Estado de Israel. Isso é muito grave, porque nós não queremos só discursos, nós queremos a prática.
For instance, we have mobilizing a lot in support of the Palestinian people. And Lula himself has made quite strong speeches about the genocide in Palestine, but the government has not yet cut relationships, economic relationships with Israel. And we need to stop with the talking and walk the talk.
Para encerrar, dizer que nós precisamos construir de fato uma política internacionalista e entender que nós não podemos ver o mundo com limites dos países e territórios. Por isso que o debate sobre os imigrantes, ele é muito importante e nós precisamos combater a xenofobia e pensar também em políticas voltadas para os imigrantes. Na cidade a qual eu sou vereadora, nós aprovamos um plano municipal para atender às demandas, inclusive de emprego e de renda para os imigrantes.
And to build a true internationalist politics, we need to see the world beyond the borders, beyond territories. We need to stop xenophobia, but also build actively public policies that protect migrants. In my city, where I am a city council, we just approved a plan to guarantee to the migrants there that they have a job, that they have a house.
Mas, infelizmente, ainda existe muita dificuldade para executar na prática esse plano voltado para a defesa dos imigrantes em Belém do Pará, na cidade a qual eu sou vereadora. Por isso que é importante que a gente entenda que não vai ser dentro da institucionalidade e apenas aprovando leis que nós vamos reverter a situação que nós vivemos hoje no Brasil e no mundo. Por isso que é muito importante que nós possamos construir lutas, solidariedade, pressão política e organizar os trabalhadores em todo o mundo.
But it's been very, very hard to implement in practice this policy that they've just passed in Belém. And this shows us that institutionality is not everything. It's not only through institutional work that we're going to make real changes. To actually change the situation, we need solidarity, we need political pressure, and we need to organize.
Yeah, I'll try to respond in a general way to the questions, but I should say there's at least 100 people in the room who know much more about South African politics than I do. So I'm not going to tell you how you should organise or what the right tactics are. It's not my place to do that. I want to make a general comment, though, about what people talk about as xenophobia, but I think we have to increasingly talk about racism. And the way that racism can enter the political discourse. And this is a general phenomenon. It's happening in most countries around the world for the reasons Daniel and other people have already talked about, that capitalism has encountered this multidimensional crisis. The neoliberal consensus that developed in politics doesn't work for anyone, really. Mainstream politics doesn't have answers. And so you get this radicalisation of politics to the right and to the left, and on the right, you get people looking for scapegoating and targets. And this is a very general phenomena of global politics today. Now, I think one of the mistakes that the left can make in this situation is to say that the people who are won to racist positions are just a little bit misguided, maybe they've just lost their way a little bit, and if we build enough houses, and if we feed them, these ideas will disappear. It's not that simple. I am in favour of building more houses, I am in favour of feeding people, I'm in favour of struggles over social and economic demands. Of course that's essential to what we're doing. But we have to say, we need to build movements that confront racism as well. You can't duck the question of racism. I'll give you an obvious example. Look at France. If you look at France, they've had wave after wave of mass social struggle of the kind I can only imagine across the Channel in Britain. They have a mass left-wing party of 500,000 members. That's brilliant. Who's going to win the next presidential election in France? The person who's 10% ahead in the opinion polls at the moment is a fascist from the Rassemblement National. The challenge is not just building social and economic struggles, you have to build mass movements that take on the right and fight them over racism and fascism as well. You have to say the fascists are not able to organise because we drive them off the street. You have to say any instance of racism, we're going to challenge, confront and drive back. So it's a twin-track strategy from the left. We fight the right and the racists on the one hand, we have the shield of anti-fascism and anti-racism, and then we have the sword of the social and economic measures on the left at the same time. Unless you do both, you can't confront the far right.
Thank you, Joseph. And on that point of what the left needs to do, I think there's some discussion even on what the left has not done. And so, in your experience, especially someone along the lines of activism and being within power as well, in Parliament, what are some of the weaknesses, maybe in the UK context of what you've observed internationally, that have opened up space for the resurgence of the far right?
In the UK context, I would say that the left is fragmented. We spend a lot of time arguing with each other, than actually building institutions and being present in our communities. And in particular, when I look at our institutions like trade unions, our membership has withered. And obviously that is due to political decisions made by Margaret Thatcher and onwards, and we have some of the harshest anti-trade union legislation in Western Europe. And because of that, we see mass political education weakened in our communities. And I also think that the work of actually convincing people that their lives can be materially better hasn't been sufficiently done. And the work that I see, the new party that we're building, it has to rebuild our trade unions. We have to increase trade union density. We grow up not knowing what trade unions are, and we enter the workforce in precarious contracts and then discover the fact that we're being exploited, and then perhaps we should join a trade union. So that work needs to be done. We need to reconstruct militant democratic trade unions. We need to root politics in everyday struggles, both within the workplace and at home. And in particular, that looks like community organising. There is no shortcut within the crises that we face. And so we need to be knocking on millions of doors. We need to identify the issues that people really care about. We need to build campaigns. We need to identify leaders. We need those issues from the ground to feed up within the national party structures, because you need to build a truly democratic party that is led by members and led by the people it seeks to represent. And you have to invest in political education. When I think about Reform and Nigel Farage polling at 30%, 40%, they will have 30 to 40% of support within trade unions as well. And our trade unions, I think, haven't really done the work in terms of addressing the threat from the far right. And one thing that is really important in terms of how we learn from the past and build is, historically, trade unions and community campaigns were part of the Anti-Nazi League that drove the National Front from the streets in the UK, and that's the kind of anti-fascist league that we need to rebuild. And there's important developments happening. There's an alliance called the Together Alliance. It's made up of trade unions, it's made up of parliamentarians, it's made of social movement groups, and there'll be a big march on the 28th of March. And it's important that we have that presence in the streets, like Joseph said, because when the fascists turn up, we turn up. And there's this really powerful thing that happened in Glasgow a couple of years ago. The Home Office was trying to deport two Indian men, and the community came out and stopped those vans from taking their neighbours, and it was a powerful display of community and solidarity. And that's what we need to do as socialists, as people who are involved in mass movement. We are on the picket lines when there is strike action. We are building trade unions by recruiting and encouraging people to join unions. We are there when the fascists turn up, because you don't just defeat them at the ballot box, you fight them in the streets where necessary. But you're also stopping deportation raids, you're stopping your neighbours from being evicted. Wherever there are sites of struggle in our communities, that's where we have to be, and we have to rebuild the power in our communities, because you can have a really great social and economic programme for government, But when the state comes for you, and in the UK context, it could be the bureaucracy of the civil service that won't allow you to deliver your program. If you do not have support from mass movement in the streets that will back you up, then you will ultimately fail. And I think that's really important that we build those alliances that are able to deal with beating the far right, but also understanding that we have to rebuild our society, and it has to be rooted in justice, peace, and equality. And that work has to be imminent. And I think in the UK we spend a lot of time just arguing amongst ourselves than dealing with the problems that we all recognise.
Yes, I fully agree with Joseph and Zarah that the issue of racism and anti-racism is fundamental and something that we must consider in every discussion that we have around the far right and how to respond to the far right. And we talked before about the many differences, internal difference between the far right, but something that is quite common is their very strong racism. And that permeates all the expression of the far right. In Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, in Europe. And this is something that came up even before far right parties access government, took national office in countries in Europe or in Latin America. For instance, in Italy, there was an organization called Casa Pound, a direct sons of the fascists of the Second World War, the sons of Mussolini. In France, there was an organization called Génération Identitaire, and what this organization did was to normalize the discourse of hate, particularly among young people and particularly among young men. In the past 5 years, there have been quite a lot of anthropological and sociological research that shows how in many countries in Europe it has become normal for young men proudly admit that they are racist. That was unthinkable 15 years ago, and we need to understand why this happened. And there was a question and comment from one of our young comrades in the back who asked about what would happen if neo-fascist parties took over and how would they respond to migrant and other marginalized communities. I don't think we need to wait until to wait and see what will happen, because we are already seeing it. We see it in the US. There are people dying daily in ICE jails, because we need to call it jail, elderly people, young people, pregnant women who die because they are denied medical assistance. Trump is sending migrants to El Salvador.
Swaziland.
And Swaziland also. In El Salvador is an interesting case because the president of El Salvador was elected as a sort of leftish guy with support of the National Liberation, Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front, and then he turned out to be what he is today. So it's not something that will happen in the future, it's something that is happening today. And I want to come back to what Joseph was saying at the beginning about the need to prepare for a new way of the far right, a new way of fascism that most likely will be totally different to what we see today.
Comrades, we'll open up one more for a round of, already have a lot of hands in the So, so let's start. Start with Brian up here. It's fine. So we'll start with Manju here, the comrade back there, and then we'll go to this comrade here, and we'll go back there, and then. So, who else? Yeah.
But I want to go home.
I don't want to listen to this fresh band. We have a very good band.
So I think this is an important conversation. It's important also for us as South Africans to remember our own past. Up until very recently, we had an apartheid state, a normalized form of racism. We grew up in a racist, institutionalized South Africa, all of us. We were labeled. So the question of racism, even though we're in another moment, is very much, very alive and real in this country. We continue, and whilst we continue to have spatial apartheid, we still go to the same schools that we went to 35 years ago. Colored communities still live in colored enclaves. African communities still live in townships, etc., etc. So racism remains alive and well. And when the economic system remains as it is, racism will continue to be the vehicle through which political opportunists make politics. At the moment, we have several of these new political formations using people's really impoverished situation, lack of jobs, etc., etc., to say, you know, you don't have a job because you're colored and because some people have started to use the word brown people. I don't know where that comes from. It's not in our vocabulary. I've waited to say that, comrade. We've always been part of a kind of all black people, all oppressed people, etc. Anyway, but the government, the ANC has fallen into this trap. While it cannot have jobs, while it continues to have the same thing, racism will grow. And it's not just xenophobia, as some people are saying. Racism is real in this country. And the white right that Alex is talking about, today they've been emboldened. Emboldened by the Trumps, emboldened by Musk, emboldened. I don't want to be crude and rude here tonight, but they've really been emboldened to talk the worst shit that you can think about. They will say that, they can't understand why we continue to harp on apartheid. It's gone. We must forget. We must move on. Life has changed. This is what they say every day. Imagine.
Thanks. Greetings from Sparta, South Africa, and the International Communist League to everyone at this gathering. I also want to start with solidarizing with Comrade Alex's comments. Comrades of Amandla magazine, when you label the EFF as fascist for demanding radical nationalizations, or Comrade Vivi, when you identify the ANC as the main danger, we feel that way, and it has been for a long time, which is US imperialism, and the crumbling hegemony of the US imperialism makes them all the more dangerous. And I think in South Africa we've only begun to see the wrath of US imperialism. And I think at the forefront of that right now, we've only begun to see the jobs bloodbath, the economic blackmail. Trump and the US imperialists are saying, don't you dare ally with China or Russia, or we will crush you. Right? That's what they're saying. The main enemy is US imperialism. So hopefully participants have gotten our open letter where we make the point that despite any political differences with Julius Malema, you would better take his side against Donald Trump, because Donald Trump told Ramaphosa to put that man in jail, and the pro-imperialist GNU, Government of National Oppression, said, yes, sir. So we better stand up and back them up, whatever our political differences. And comrades, one last point, I would like to make a similar point about Venezuela, because in your recent issue, yes, you oppose intervention, but you make Look, we had better say when it comes to Venezuela, not complain, oh, Maduro is very anti-democratic, We better say defend Venezuela against U.S. imperialism and take a damn side.
I get it. Yeah.
We all do. Why would we take Trump?
Thank you. I think that capitalism has been very destructive in South Africa, Southern Africa, Latin America, the whole world. I think if we think about the destructiveness of migrant labor here in South Africa, it touched Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, most countries. So when you think about it in more, let's say, human terms, there was really no need for so much human suffering just to build an economy. So I think that we should, following what Comrade Vavi was saying about the danger of the ANC shifting to the right, we should more aggressively promote our unity with people born in Mozambique, people born in Zimbabwe. I think when we have political meetings, we should have comrades born in Zimbabwe, in Namibia, speaking in front. When we form our organizations, some of the leaders must be from Malawi, from Ethiopia. When we put campaigns together, we should put at the forefront the Ethiopian genocide and things like that. I think it's very important, comrades. And we should emphasize, we don't want to recognize colonial borders. That way we can distinguish ourselves from this ANC bourgeoisie.
Hello, sir, I've got a question. I have not no answer. Yeah. But when I hear about strategies that people want to build socialism, people are saying. Sorry, I've got a question. When you're trying to build strategies to build socialism, isn't it important also to notice that there are differences between the global north and global south? For example, I know that there's the economic devastation in the global north and global south. But sometimes, for example, in Cape Town, you come across people that working class British people who come and stay in 5-star hotels in South Africa. So there's something that is very different between working class businesses in Britain and working class in South Africa. And for example, England is sending refugees or people that don't want migrants, they send them to Rwanda. Trump is sending them people who are in jail, but probably for whatever reason, but they're not Americans, putting them in Swaziland. So I think that also must look at the differences in the global north and global south, and how much solidarity can we actually expect from the global north. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I also want to pursue this issue of the fragmentation of the left forces, particularly in South Africa. Neville Alexandra makes a point about speaking of the place where the dog is buried. I think people who speak Xhosa understand that analogy much better. But the place where the dog is buried in answering this question is also about how divided we are as the left in South Africa. I don't know if there's something called ideological narcissism, where every left organization believes that its theory, its principle, its approach is superior to the other left organization. And for as long as we pursue politics that way, the left in South Africa will continue to be divided. Look at the far-right movement in South Africa. They find it very easy, and I think our comrade from the UK also spoke about the right movement in the UK. They find it very easy to consolidate their forces even if they have differences amongst themselves. They work on a minimum program in order to pursue their own agenda. Yet here in South Africa, as the left, the trade union organizes separately, the civic movements organize separately, social movements organize separately. We never find a common agenda amongst ourselves where we say, let's carve out a minimum program. And that minimum program will be the one that we all pursue. I think that is the real danger that we are confronted with. So the question that we are trying to answer about how the left can be stopped should actually be flipped. It should be flipped to say, how can the left be activated in South Africa? Because as long as these divisions and fragmentations happen amongst ourselves, we are going to, as the left, keep on conceding space to the far right and the right movements in South Africa. And I hope that platforms like this will help us to answer the real questions that are confronting us. Thank you very much.
It's a good place to end, eh?
So, thanks very much for the contributions that everybody's made. I want to just ask one or two questions and pose something. It seems to me that we all agree on the great urgency that we are facing in terms of the rise of the right and the rise of the extreme right and all the ramifications it has right up to the point of war. And so the question, I think, and taking from a number of speakers, is the question of unity. And the question of unity seems to me the most pressing issue that we face. And I want to ask all of the panelists, what are the prospects for building broad unity? Unity that can lead to action. I know that tomorrow we have a session on international solidarity. And I know that Juliana and I know that Vivi are going to speak about calls and processes to bring together instances like the World Social Forum to a broad global unity to build some basic power to oppose the rise of the right. And it seems to me the methodology of the World Social Forum, whilst not perfect, and certainly in the last years of the World Social Forum was proven to be very problematic. But in the early days, that call in February 2002 to mobilize against the war in Iraq seems to me the example that we need to look towards, and we need to convene such a broad global unity against war, against xenophobia, against racism, against sexism, against misogyny and homophobia. And I think we need to construct that process, and we, I think, in South Africa need to be doing that at home, and we need to be doing it regionally, and we need to be collaborating with you globally.
I want to respond to a couple of things that came from the floor. I think we have to be very clear that nationalism and EFF are a left nationalist organisation. We speak about socialism like many organisations, parties around the world, but their politics are essentially nationalism. MK, the same, as it is with the ANC. And we understand as socialists that nationalism is essentially the politics of the middle class. That's why we're socialists. We want working class politics. That doesn't mean we don't defend Malema when he's attacked by the state. It doesn't mean we don't defend Maduro when he's attacked by the US. It doesn't mean that we don't defend our migrants when they're attacked by the ANC, and in this city they're being attacked. But at the same time, we have to be very clear that They have no clear answers. And that's why we're holding this event, to develop those answers collaboratively, to come back to what Stephen Faulkner said this morning, to tie the rope, to tie the rope. What are we doing, comrades? Tying the rope. Tie the rope. Tie the rope. Together, we're going to be stronger. Because unless we come together, we cannot fulfill any of the tasks of building a movement which defends our migrants, which beats back racism, which beats back the retrenchments, which helps build our social movements and so on. We need a national organisation, and that means we need a number of the comrades in this room. Most of the people who are here today are not members of ZASO. We're appealing to you to join us in your numbers. We need you. There are comrades in this room you've seen speak, who you can approach, and I'm sure you've got lots of questions about whether you want to join or not. But without you, let me say, we haven't got a hope in high hell of doing any of the big tasks that confront us at this moment. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you, comrades. So, to close off our discussion, I'm going to request the speakers to be flexible, clear, concise, and brief as usual, and to deal with the question of what are the glimmers of hope, what are the prospects of unity as we face this rising tide of fascism.
Well, I would be very happy to talk about that. That would be my favorite subject. But I cannot avoid the question about Venezuela because I was the one who wrote that article. And I'm very happy that Amandla invited me to write that article, even though they know very well what I think about Venezuela. And that's something that I truly appreciate of Amandla. There has been a space where voices from different families of the left could have a conversation. Absolutely. And I think that's something that we need, and I'm sure Amandla will continue in that tradition. Amandla is read not only in South Africa, it's read in many places in Europe, many places in Latin America, and something that we really appreciate is that possibility to have a conversation, which is becoming quite difficult in many parts of the global left. I'm not going to defend that article, and I really invite you to read it, but I want to remind the comrade who made the comments that the article title is Venezuela and the Global Left, No to Both Authoritarianism and No to Imperialist Aggression. So there's a clear no to imperialist aggression. So I think we all agree on that. And I think we need to be quite careful about the distinction between discourse and real politics, real practice. So I really appreciate what you say, and I'm not going to comment on the South African side. But I am Latin America, so when I think about the right, I think also about countries that are supposedly leftist, but from my perspective, and from the perspective of many comrades in Latin America, are very clearly right-wing, neoliberal, anti-workers government. And in that category, I would include the government of Nicaragua, under the dictatorship of Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo, and I would include the current government of Nicolás Maduro and his mafioso government. And I want to make a distinction between Maduro and between the legacy of Hugo Chavez. I lived in Venezuela. I dreamed about the Bolivarian Revolution. I was one of those who spent years working with the Bolivarian Revolution, and it's quite sad to see what is going on. But if there is an imperialist aggression, despite our difference with the current government, we are going to be supporting Venezuela. We are not going to be supporting Maduro.
I'm going to be really brief about where I find pockets of hope. So I find pockets of hope when there are 8 young people on hunger strike against the British state in solidarity with Palestine. I find hope when there are young people in Glasgow, in Leeds and across the country who are organising in their trade union, and they work in Starbucks and they work in cinemas and they work in, what was the 4th one? Cinemas, hotels and coffee shops. And that's where I find hope, where young people are refusing to kind of wait for the baton to be passed on, and they are getting organised in trade unions, they are getting organised in social movements. And I think in the past 2 years, where we've all witnessed a live stream genocide, seeing Palestinian people in the middle of that genocide return to the north of Gaza, back to their homes in the rubble, their resilience, their defiance, their refusal to be annihilated when the world's most powerful army and the world's most powerful governments are seeking to destroy them. That gives me hope, and it reminds me that we can never give up, and we must continue to fight until all oppressed people are free. Thank you.
Okay, just very briefly on Venezuela, because I agree with much of what's been said. I think we have to be clear as the left. When US or British imperialism or French imperialism is on the rampage, we are absolutely clear which side we stand on. We are always against US imperialism, wherever it tries to invade, whether it's Cuba, Venezuela, Afghanistan, Iraq, North Korea, I don't care. I'm against US imperialism, I march against US imperialism, I will fight for the defeat of US and British imperialism. I have to add, and British, because that's where I'm from. And it's very important to oppose your own ruling class in these things. But we don't do ourselves any favours if we automatically paint any regime that America happens to hate as being a perfect socialist paradise. Absolutely. It's not. It's not. It attracts workers. It's not a socialist paradise. So we have to be able to have this honest argument where we're clear about imperialism, but we're also clear about the debates about the kind of society we want to build. So we have to be better on this question. I want to talk just briefly about hope and unity. You've had a very rousing speech about why you should join a socialist organisation. I want to make it clear there's no contradiction between joining socialist and revolutionary organisation and fighting for unity in the working class. You can do both. You can do both. I'll give you an example from Britain. Zarah mentioned it briefly last summer, not this summer, last summer. There was a horrible attack on some children in Liverpool. Some people were stabbed. Immediately the far right go on social media and say it's a migrant who did it, it's a Muslim who did it, all the usual things. Crowds of far-right hooligans and far-right well-known fascists start assembling outside mosques, outside immigration hotels, where the refugees live in Britain, and they start trying to launch a pogrom, a series of attacks. They start attacking mosques. They start burning refugee hostels. There's a refugee hostel that was firebombed in one of the attacks. They're trying to kill people. That movement grew and grew, and the far right, it looked like were taking control of the streets. What was the answer to that from the left? From organisations like mine, Socialist Workers' Party, Stand Up to Racism, the broad united front we work in. Don't be scared. You've got to rally the people who want to stand up to this, who want to stop the pogrom. It doesn't matter what their starting point is, it doesn't matter if they're a socialist yet, it doesn't matter if they're a revolutionary, you get them on the streets, you get them outside the refugee hostels, you get them outside the mosques, you stand up to the right, you stop them marching, you stop them terrorising our communities, and you break their momentum. And within 2 or 3 days, we drove back the far right and we contained that movement. Now, if we hadn't done that, if we hadn't built that unity inside the working class, Britain will be a much, much more dangerous place today than it actually is. And we have to keep doing it. We have to keep doing it because the far right are going to keep coming for us. So that's what we talk about when we talk about unity. Doesn't mean we drop our political differences. It means that we unite around the things that we agree with, and we can argue later about the things we disagree with. That's what unity in practice means. That's how we win, and that's why we can have hope in this period.
There are many questions.
Just choose one.
Sobre a questão do racismo, no Brasil a gente enfrenta algo similar, que é uma tentativa de nos convencer que existe uma democracia racial e que as pessoas negras podem conquistar as mesmas coisas que as pessoas brancas através da meritocracia. E nós precisamos combater essa lógica da meritocracia e do racismo e da democracia racial.
On racism, in Brazil, we face something quite similar. We are everyday people try to convince us that there is in Brazil a racial democracy, that black people could ascend to any of the positions as white people through merit. That's called meritocracy, and we need to dismantle that myth.
Mas as condições são totalmente desiguais. Por isso que hoje uma das pautas políticas do movimento negro é por reparação e mês passado nós realizamos uma marcha de mulheres negras no Brasil que contou com 300 mil mulheres e nessa marcha o eixo central era por reparação e bem viver.
But as we know, the conditions are completely unequal between black and white people. And this is why in the Brazilian movement, in the Brazilian black movement, one of the biggest agendas we have now is on reparations. Just a while back, we had a march of over 300,000 women on the streets demanding, with a central demand that would be to expose this democracy, the racial democracy discourse, and demand reparations, well-being. I don't know how to explain that term. Well-being. Yes.
Mas nós acredito que são importantes esses movimentos, até porque a gente ainda vive uma sociedade capitalista e desigual. Mas é importante também que nós possamos lutar de forma coletiva com pessoas brancas e pessoas negras e todos aqueles que constroem a luta socialista para derrubar o sistema capitalista. Nós precisamos colocar essa relação de raça, classe, gênero com centralidade e não achar que elas estão desconectadas.
And I believe that to be able to address these inequalities, we need to fight together in a very collective way, together black and white people, to build the socialist struggle, to dismantle capitalism, understanding that racism, class and gender are intrinsic and interconnected parts of it.
E nesse momento se observa uma grande dificuldade, debilidade organizativa e programática da classe trabalhadora. E nós precisamos, eu concordo com as falas que trazem a necessidade de pensar um programa mínimo. E nós temos essa necessidade, de fato, de construir um programa, de se organizar internacionalmente, unir a esquerda para derrubar o capitalismo, mas derrubar também o racismo, o sexismo e as outras formas de opressão.
So our difficulty today is left, it's an organizational difficulty, it's also a programmatic difficulty. I agree with all the interventions that mention the need to really think of a minimum program, to think together a minimum program and unite ourselves to dismantle capitalism and the different oppressions that are intrinsic to it.
E por fim, queria parabenizar por essa 100ª edição da Amandla e dizer que nós, do movimento a qual eu faço parte, que é o MEIS, Movimento Esquerda Socialista, nós temos também uma revista que é a revista Movimento. e que é muito parecida com a Amandla, e que essa também é uma ferramenta que nós, da esquerda socialista, precisamos construir, inclusive disputando ideia e consciência através do que é escrito e assim também expandir as nossas ideias ao longo do mundo.
So I would like to take the opportunity to congratulate the Amandla magazine 100th edition. I would like to mention that our movement, the movement of the socialist left, we also have a magazine that is quite similar to Amandla. It's called Movimento, Movement. And this is a tool. These magazines are tools for us to organize ourselves, but also to build and dispute ideas, expanding the way we understand the world.
Thank you.
Thank you again to all the comrades who were part of making this celebration of the edition, the 100th edition of Amandla, such an enriching discussion. So once again, for yourselves as well, comrades, for really enriching the debate. So please read Amandla. Please visit the website, and I would employ young comrades like myself who are in the room to put forward your opinions and to write for Amandla as well. And just to remind comrades in terms of the rest of the evening, Ipupuliga Biko will be performing at 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock we have a band, so comrades hang around for some good music and some good times.